True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
The life of Sharon Nelson is a fascinating case study of a sociopathic woman who could win a man's affection, seduce him into leaving his wife and family, and convince him to kill for her. She was dangerous to any man who could give her something she wanted, and she had no remorse or empathy if he or anyone else got in her way. Sharon grew up in a strict religious family. An early marriage was followed by numerous affairs, divorces, and mysterious deaths. Sharon married for money, but there was never enough. Once the money was gone, she would get bored and she would move on. When divorce didn't appeal to her, she turned to murder. Sharon was brash, trashy, and manipulative, to the point where you would expect intelligent, normal people to see through her exploits. But amazingly, she wasn't stopped until overwhelming evidence revealed her evil deeds. Even then, when she confessed to police in a Pizza Hut in 1988, she showed no sympathy for her victims. Investigations into her crimes would show that Sharon was far from an evil genius. Many of her exploits were careless and just outright stupid. Looking back, those who survived having Sharon in their lives would wonder how she had fooled them for as long as she did. Sharon Nelson was a typical black widow in that she saw men that she seduced as disposable. She used the same tricks over and over to get what she wanted. At the Quiet End today, we're telling the story of Sharon Nelson, a killer who took as much pleasure in the hunt as she seemed to in the final result. And Dick has brought us a beer from the region where this crime occurred.
I have a barley wine. It's called Bly's Barley Wine. It's brewed by Dry Dock Brewing Company in Aurora, Colorado. Now this is an English barley wine, which typically means it's a little more refined than its American cousin, so not as hoppy.
Like people, English aggressive. People are a little more refined than their American cousins.
Possibly.
Yes.
I wouldn't take that as a 100% generalization, but...
Well, just the accent makes them sound more refined, even if they're not.
Yes. So anyway, Bly's Barley Wine is a dark brown beer with not much of a head to it, like most barley wines. It's got a nice aroma, some toffee, some fruit, and there's the alcohol there. Then when you taste it, very nice. Some raisins, toffee, and the alcohol. But the alcohol is kind of complementary.
Good. So it's not overwhelming.
It's not.
Good.
It's a medium-bodied beer, maybe more towards the heavier body side, medium heavy. Certainly a sipping beer, not when you chug down to quench your thirst. It's a good beer.
Okay, well, thanks for bringing it along. I'd like to try it.
All right, let's open this puppy up.
Okay. Okay, that is a rich-looking beer.
It is, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. We might share it with some people.
Yeah, let's saunter on down to the Quiet End here.
Okay.
Pull up a stool.
Well, the nice thing, last week was our first time in this new bar.
Yes.
And we had to get this whole new Quiet End. But it seems like the locals in this bar have already embraced us.
You know, they seem friendly down here.
They sure do.
Not gonna lie, I've met a lot of people down here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And my new best friend is Jake, who I call the cowboy. Because he just looks like a cowboy, you know? Mm-hmm. He's got the hat. He's got the really tan, weather-beaten skin.
Okay.
And he's just a fantastic guy. The stories he tells, wonderful.
Yeah. So it's been great so far.
It has been. And we've only been here a short time. So we're going to be having a good time here, I think.
Yeah, so Sharon, where did she come from? She came from out in the South? It ended up in Colorado? Is that how the story went?
She did. Let's start in 1976.
Okay.
Okay. We're in the summer of 76. And Mike Fuller, his wife Sharon, and their two daughters, Rochelle and Denise, were traveling west from Durham, North Carolina, to two towns in Colorado, La Junta and Rocky Ford. So Mike's a minister in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they're driving to their new congregation in Colorado. What should have been a happy time was marred by the circumstances of their leaving North Carolina. In fact, Mike had been asked to leave. His wife Sharon had been having a torrid extramarital affair, or even affairs, and this was certainly something the elders of the church could not abide.
Now, what makes an affair torrid? Is there a criteria for that?
It's hotter.
Hotter.
Yes.
I thought it was maybe more controversial. No?
No, I just think it was a hotter affair.
Okay, so it's really intense.
Really intense. Well, it was intense enough that her lover got her pregnant.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of people have gotten pregnant without a lot of intensity,
Okay.
honestly, but okay.
All right. So Mike had said on more than one occasion during this trip, "We're being kicked out because you're a little slut, Sharon."
So he's not a nice guy.
No, he's pretty bitter about this.
Yeah.
Sharon had been born in 1945 to Morris and Josephine Douglas in Maryland. She was the middle of 3 daughters. Morris Douglas was a carpenter, Josephine was a homemaker, and a part-time church bus driver, primarily a homemaker. The family was Seventh-day Adventist, but they were very restrictive, even more so than most Seventh-day Adventists, with their particular interpretation of the religion. So, no dancing.
It's like Footloose.
No movies. No bowling.
Well, bowling just leads to sex.
Josephine would take a tube from the radio whenever she went shopping and left the girls alone. And they had a TV for a short time, but this was banned after Elvis was on the Ed Sullivan Show and swiveled his hips.
So they weren't even allowed to listen to him on the radio then?
Nope. Everything was monitored and censored. So Sharon considered her mother to be a beautiful woman, but a very cold, aloof person. And Sharon grew into adulthood without ever seeing her mother laugh, so she says.
If that were true, I just can't imagine.
Me either.
That'd be a tough life.
What a household.
Yeah, right?
But apparently in the Douglas household, emotions were expertly hidden. The girls were taught from early on that they loved everybody. There was no exception to that.
Okay, is that part of their church upbringing?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe a little more on the conservative side. Now, Sharon's older sister, after her arrest, said Sharon was taught to be who she is, and she learned her lesson very well. Now, Sharon's deviousness, as we're going to find out, was probably a way to protect herself.
But she was devious. So going back to her parents, like many in their generation, Josephine and Morris Douglas believed in corporal punishment. A good spanking or whipping, along with some good old religion, could straighten out even the most ill-behaved child, in their opinion. So years later, Sharon told a friend that she would never bring God and a belt into the room at the same time.
That's a cool comment.
Yeah, I'm
really
okay
like
with that. Yeah. So Sharon met Mike through the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They dated, and it wasn't very passionate. But it was for a couple of years, and Sharon was 20, and Mike proposed to her. She accepted, but then 3 days before her wedding, she visited her parents in Maryland and told them she didn't think she could go through with it. But her parents, particularly her mother, were really opposed to that notion, and in the end, Sharon did agree and went through with the wedding, which I don't think is very smart for her parents to push her in that direction.
Well, in hindsight, it certainly wasn't.
No.
But I can see, these are pretty strict parents, right?
But that made her all the more bitter.
Yeah, but that they've raised their kids to be loyal, truthful, and so on. And you just don't back out of a wedding.
But we know now that, of course you do.
Well, yeah.
You'd much rather have backing out of a wedding than getting a divorce. Or, in her case, having someone murdered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the time, the parents are fixated on their daughter getting married, and there's no question that she is going to marry. Plus, this is not just some schmo off the street. This is a minister of the church.
Well, that's true. I wasn't thinking. That's probably really important in this
certain
story.
amount of prestige.
Yeah, I bet that's a big part of it. So let's go back to when they're married and they're moving. It was supposed to be a really happy time, but it was really marred by the circumstances. About Mike being asked to leave because of Sharon's extramarital affair. And this was something the elders of the church totally wouldn't abide. And Mike was blaming Sharon. Now, he said on more than one occasion that she was a little slut. So he's getting verbally abusive and bitter.
He is, and he's saying this to her in front of the kids.
Yeah, that's terrible. Now, when the family finally arrived at their destination, which was Colorado, they found their new home to be very unfit. It was terrible. So they had to check into a local motel, and Sharon was up all night because the girls got sick.
Yeah, they had some stomach bug. And
Yeah, they caught something.
Diarrhea all the time. Ugh.
Yeah. So even the church, though, was a disappointment. It was an ugly church in real stark contrast to the beautiful old church that Mike had had in North Carolina. And not a long time after their arrival, Mike returned home from work at the church and told Sharon to get the girls ready to go out. They'd been invited to dinner at the home of one of the elders of the congregation, so this was a big deal. Dr. Perry Nelson was one of the local superstars in their church. He was an optometrist who seemed to have it all: a loyal wife, 3 nearly grown daughters, beautiful home, and a successful optometry office in Rocky Ford and another one in Trinidad. Perry Edson Nelson II was born in Cedar Lake, Michigan. He was the first member of his family to attend college, and his parents were just overjoyed when he became a doctor of optometry. His wife, Julie, was this quiet, sweet woman, and as Perry chronically complained, she was cold to him. So I guess not very physically affectionate. But maybe the coldness stemmed from her husband's chronic philandering. She might have had damn good reason.
One would think, right?
Yes, because he wasn't faithful to her.
Perry had a lot of affairs. Well,
Yeah.
I don't even know if you call them affairs. Encounters.
Yes. And Julie was one of these stand-by-your-man women. You know, she believed that she was supposed to stand by him and stay with him. She helped him in his office, and she worked as a bookkeeper for another doctor. Plus, she was raising their 3 daughters, Tammy, Kathy, and Julie.
You know, also invited to this little informal dinner, which was a little more formal than it had been maybe intended. This was a chance for kind of the elders of the church to meet Mike and Sharon and their kids. So also invited were other leading couples from the Adventist church, including dentist Carl Wheeler and his wife Blanche. So the dinner went pretty well, but there were some differing views on the new minister's wife. It was the Wheelers' opinion that Sharon was out looking.
Yeah, is that what they called it, out looking?
Looking for a man.
Looking for a man, which isn't good because she's the minister's wife.
Right. But she already has this track record.
Right.
Which I'm sure the people in Colorado knew about.
You think so?
Sure.
Think word got over there?
Yeah.
Well, the overall opinion, though, was that new blood was needed in that part of Colorado, and that Mike and Sharon Fuller had arrived just in time. Perry Nelson also needed a boost, and he found all of that and more in the minister's attractive wife, Sharon. She wore her hair long, she wore her dresses tight, and her blouses unbuttoned, maybe one button too many. She had a very seductive way of walking and interacting, so Perry was immediately smitten with her. He already had a wandering eye.
He did.
And she caught his eye.
I had to chuckle. It sounded like one of those lines from those cheap detective novels, right?
Yeah.
The broad had her long hair, tight dress, and a blouse unbuttoned, one button too many.
Yeah. You like how I worded that?
I chuckle at that.
Well, the Fuller and the Nelson families, despite that, became fairly close friends. The Nelsons invited the Fullers to go camping with them over that Memorial Day weekend. And the day after they arrived at the campground, while Julie stayed behind, Perry, Mike, Sharon, and the girls went out for a hike. Mike became queasy and he returned to the camper. And while the girls scampered ahead, Perry and Sharon had a chance to talk to each other alone. And Sharon mentioned that she was open to an affair. She told them right outright. She had had an affair before, and she'd been working at a printing business, and shortly thereafter began an affair with one of her bosses there. So not only had this been taboo in the church, but even worse, the man was married with 2 children. And that's what had made them end up in Colorado in the first place. So sex and companionship was what Sharon always craved, and she would always get plenty of that when she'd take on a lover. But then a complication arose, and she became pregnant when they were back in North Carolina. And that's when she told Mike that the baby was his, even though it wasn't. And Rochelle Fuller was born in 1969. Rochelle ended up being quite a colicky infant, and Sharon became very, very stressed with that baby. And eventually she did tell Mike that the baby was not his. So this was another one of the things that had led to everyone finding out about the affair and Mike being transferred to Colorado. So even though she'd had this affair and all this horrible stuff had happened, now she's telling Perry Nelson she's up for another affair.
So, and I guess maybe the Wheelers were kind of observant in that when they were talking about how she was looking for a man.
Absolutely. I think they were totally on the right track.
Now, one thing did quickly become evident once the Fullers had moved to Colorado. Sharon was not a shrinking violet. Far from it.
Very outgoing.
Now, nobody could say she wasn't friendly, right?
Right.
Very, very outgoing, helpful, polite, eager to please, very warm. Anybody could strike up a conversation with her.
Yeah, she'd even be nice to the wife of the guy she was screwing.
Yeah.
Didn't bother her.
Nope.
But she really didn't fit in. I mean, her dresses were just skin tight. Her tops were fitted in a way that the shape and size of her breasts were just right out there for everyone to see. And she really didn't usually wear a bra. So in this religion that didn't condone adornment, makeup, jewelry, or overt sexuality, she was totally pushing the limit. Her shorts were short enough that people could see her buttocks popping out in the back. Parishioners and other townspeople soon came to the conclusion that Sharon had her eyes on Perry too, so she wasn't very coy about that either.
Subtlety was not one of her strong points.
No, nope.
However, it was a woman named Barbara Rossetti who first had an inkling that something was going on between Perry and Sharon. Barbara was Perry's secretary and kind of de facto office manager.
Yeah, she knew totally what was going on at the office. She knew Perry well.
Yeah, she'd
I
been
think
with
she
him
knew about
for
his
years.
infidelities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she knew him probably better than his wife did.
She probably did. So she'd been working with him for many years, almost 10 years. They managed to forge a close and enduring friendship over these years. And as you said, Barb was aware that Perry had been unfaithful to Julie at many different times of their marriage. But she felt that overall, Perry was a decent human being, except for that one tiny flaw of wanting to have sex with whatever woman was available.
Right, yeah. Well, Dr. Nelson gave Barbara 1 day's warning that he was bringing in a new girl to a satellite office in Trinidad, and this new girl turned out to be Sharon Fuller. And it wasn't long before Perry and Sharon were deeply into their steamy affair. Perry's wife, Julie, wasn't stupid and she wasn't blind. She knew that her husband was going down that slope again. She could see what was happening.
Well, she's been through this a number of times before.
Right.
So she knows the signs.
Right.
So the summer of 76 went on, and the gossip and innuendo kept increasing. Probably Perry and Sharon's affair was the worst kept secret in all of southeast Colorado. Julie, for her part, tried to keep her husband on a shorter leash, and Mike Fuller was keeping closer tabs on his wife Sharon. But it became pretty clear that neither of these strategies would work.
I don't think that ever works. If someone wants to stray, you can't keep a hold of them. When you get to that point, the relationship's in trouble. That's not a normal way. It's not a healthy relationship at that point,
No.
obviously.
Now, if I'm standing guard over you 24 hours a day,
Yeah, that wouldn't fly.
you wouldn't think I was as cool as I am.
No, I wouldn't.
See?
But Sharon was really the subject of the gossip in town. So one story goes that when Sharon was helping at the Bible school, she came home in tears and told Mike that some teenage boys had propositioned her. Now the real story was that the roles had been reversed, and it was Sharon who was propositioning these boys. She also enlisted her sister Judy during the affair. She would tell her husband she was going to visit her nephew, who was sick with meningitis, and then she would go off to a motel with Perry.
She would. Now, her sister, though, abetted her in this stuff. I mean, she lied for Sharon.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There's the view that when someone's your friend or your sister, you cover for them, regardless. So
I guess.
There's like a code, I guess.
Sure. Is that what you did with your sisters?
In some ways when we were young.
Okay.
Not to this extent, but of course there are some things you cover each other for. So the couple who was so perceptive, Carl and Blanche Wheeler, were deep in preparations for their daughter's wedding when Sharon called to ask them whether she could come to their house and practice a song that she would sing at the next Sabbath. Despite being strung out from all the preparations, Blanche agreed to this. And that same day, Perry Nelson was bringing his RV to the Wheelers so that they had a place for some of the wedding guests to sleep that were coming to visit. Now, Sharon arrived first and sat herself down at the piano, telling Blanche how grateful she was. But as soon as Perry arrived a little later, her practice ended abruptly.
That was it. She was ready to practice on Perry.
So they jumped into that RV, as the story goes, huh?
They did.
So don't come knocking if the RV's rocking.
Something like that. You
Yeah.
know?
Well, finally, friends of the two couples worked up the courage to talk to Mike Fuller. Mike was dismissive of their concerns, but as soon as he got home, he confronted Sharon, and she steadfastly denied everything. Julie Nelson, meanwhile, came home from a Tupperware party to find a quite frazzled Mike Fuller out on her porch. Mike told Julie that his wife Sharon and her husband Perry were together, and that they were planning a life with each other. Julie and Mike went out looking for the lovebirds and found them in a nearby motel. They went and got the sheriff, and they went into the hotel room. Rochelle was there with them, and she went home with Mike. Now both girls remained with Mike. Lori, the youngest Nelson girl, remained with Julie. But Sharon ended up missing her girls terribly. She said that it was just really tearing her up. So she felt like she couldn't give her daughters up, and she began to waffle on her decision to run off with Perry. She felt guilty and called a family friend who was a counselor, and he advised her to get some help, some counseling. Then Sharon went to Texas and saw a psychologist almost daily for 2 weeks. Now, why did she go to Texas for that?
That's where the guy she called was living there.
Okay.
And this is who she trusted.
It must have been close to the border, because couldn't that be a long way from Colorado?
Yeah, it's a trip,
Yeah.
but she went.
Okay.
So I guess I'm thinking at this point she was having some misgivings about the affair.
Well, not the affair, but leaving the family for him.
Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And was trying to get some help.
Mm-hmm. Which seems okay, like an okay thing to do.
Yeah. And that's what people in town wanted. Blanche Wheeler spoke for many in the town, and when she said, when Sharon left for Texas, we all hoped she would get help and do the right thing by Mike and her little girls. We hoped and we prayed.
So they're giving her a chance.
They were.
Yeah. So pretty forgiving. I mean, even though Mike was bitter, he did seem forgiving. Unless it was just all about appearances in the church.
My take on that is that's what it's about. I don't think he was anywhere near still in love with her. And I think it just would look better for him to have a wife by his side.
Well, yes, divorce would be totally frowned upon.
So the counselor she was seeing in Texas encouraged Sharon to call Mike because he felt that the marriage still had a chance, even with her promiscuity. So Sharon agreed, told the counselor she'd give Mike another chance and she would break up with Perry. Now Perry really took this badly.
He was really in love with her, let's be honest.
Well, at the beginning.
Head over heels.
So at about that time, Perry's and Julie's high school reunion was about to take place in Michigan. Perry was neither happy nor interested in this whole reunion with his wife or their classmates, and acted like a big jerk the whole time. On the flight back to Colorado from the reunion, Julie sat by herself, wouldn't even sit with him.
No, he really was hurting her feelings.
She sobbed the whole way back.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Julie should have bailed on the whole thing. Which I think she eventually did, didn't she?
She did, but it took a while.
Yeah. Well, Mike flew down and he and Sharon drove back to Colorado in her car, and Mike had been relocated now to a new church in a suburb of Denver. Sharon took a job in Denver, but the reconciliation didn't last very long. She was just emotionally falling apart. So Perry sent her a silver music box that played Somewhere My Love, and Sharon made up her mind she just loved him. So she quit her job, she told Mike she was leaving him for Perry, and this time she said it was for good. Now Mike Fuller, though, he wasn't going to just take this. There was no way that he was going to have Rochelle and Denise living in sin with Sharon and Perry. So he filed for custody of the girls, and after a short battle, Sharon gave in and she said, let him have them. So Sharon returned to Rocky Ford, and this brought some degree of relief to Perry's wife, Julie, because she was finally going to be free of Perry and his lies. Julie and Lori, her youngest daughter, moved to California, so Julie's free of Perry at last. Now, of course, she was hurt, but I think at this point, it was the best thing for her.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No question. It should have happened a long time ago.
Well, what about that story about what Perry said to her when he came out to say goodbye and wish them a safe trip?
Yeah, what a dickhead move, huh?
Yeah, he said to Julie, maybe if things don't work out, you'll want to come back and we can start over. Julie was stunned. She said, I won't, and if I ever did, I would not want to start over here.
So now we've got the two lovers reunited, and they're going to live happily ever after.
Yeah, they're an actual couple now.
But things didn't go smoothly that often for the two of them. So Sharon, who continued to work in Perry's practice, managed to alienate many, many patients in Perry's practice. One of the first to leave the practice was a wealthy family whose son was getting married, and he wanted to give his prospective bride a set of contact lenses for a wedding gift. How romantic.
That's a weird one, but okay.
Okay.
Thinking maybe back then that was like a big deal, contact lenses, right? It wasn't an everyday thing.
Okay.
Because this was a while ago.
I'm going to be charitable and say that this was a gift from the heart.
That's the only thing that would explain it.
So they're in the office to try the lenses on, and the place was busy, so Sharon was asked to dispense the lenses. And this is back in the day when they had just the hard lenses.
Right,
No
right.
such thing as soft contacts.
Yeah, this is like the early days of lenses.
So she's putting them in, and the young lady was wincing in pain. This was not unusual for first-time wearers of hard contact lenses. I can remember that.
Do you?
Yeah.
It hurt?
Like hell. So she's saying, the young lady saying, this hurts, please take them out. Sharon jumped up, called her a damn baby, and stormed out of the room. That's that.
Right.
So when the family's checking out, the husband said to Barb that none of his family would ever return to the office again.
And these were good clients.
These were good clients, and these were also kind of the first of many, many people to leave the practice. I mean, by the time she was done with Perry, he didn't have much left for a practice.
No, she really just destroyed him, really. Now, another thing that really was irritating Sharon was that she was living in Julie's house, the house that Julie and Perry had had. She and Perry bought a little house, and as soon as their divorces were final. Or maybe not. There's some question of whether he was officially divorced at that point. She and Perry got married. So they exchanged vows in 1977 in a private ceremony in Taos, New Mexico. And once back in Colorado, Sharon assumed the role of practice manager, and one of her duties there was to pay the bills. Big mistake. So this quickly became a joke. Sharon didn't pay anything. She continued to drain the practice of income. And then just a couple months later, she announced that she was pregnant, and she had a beautiful baby boy in March of '78. Now, of course, this caused more gossip from people who decided that Sharon must have been pregnant before they were married.
Well,
So
sure.
that was a big deal back then.
Small towns, they got to talk about people.
Right. Now, meanwhile, Perry's youngest daughter, Lori, was having a lot of trouble with her mother, Julie. Perry and Julie finally agreed that Lori could spend the summer with her father and Sharon and enroll in Campion Seventh-day Adventist Academy in Loveland, Colorado that fall. The family had a great time in the summer touring the East Coast, but Sharon's true colors were becoming apparent. On New Year's Eve 1978, Sharon encouraged Lori, who was only 15 at the time, to get drunk. And shortly after that, she showed Lori how to hide peppermint schnapps in a mouthwash bottle so she could smuggle it into school and drink during the school day. Now, this is not what you expect of a stepmom. Now,
No.
At the same time, Sharon was calling the dean of the school, warning her that Lori was smuggling alcohol onto the school grounds. So she's kind of out to get Lori.
She sure is. And Lori was confronted by the dean, and she said, yeah, I do have a bit of a problem, but no more so than any of the other kids.
Well, Perry and Sharon drove together to Lori's school to straighten it all out, and Lori would say she'd never seen her father so angry. Perry threw Lori on her bed when they got home and whipped her with his belt. Thrashing around on her bed, Lori got a nosebleed. And after the beating, Perry, Sharon, and Lori went out to see the movie Caddyshack. Her roommate came into the room and saw the blood. So she thought a crime had been committed in the room because she was in a school where she lived there.
Yeah, it's not a day school.
Right, so
Boarding
she had
school.
a roommate.
Yeah.
So Lori goes out to the movies with her dad and stepmom, and her roommate comes to the room and sees blood on the sheets.
A lot of blood.
Yeah. So when Lori returned, she explained what had happened, but she was still expelled from the academy 2 weeks later. And she went back again to live with her mother. And that's probably what Sharon wanted all along, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
She didn't want her there.
No. And Sharon sent Lori a letter requesting the return of everything she'd bought her to set up the dorm afterwards. Although Lori knew that her father had been the one to purchase the stuff, she was just angry, so she boxed it all up and sent it back to Sharon. Because she knew there's no winning with Sharon, especially when her father's involved. He's going to take Sharon's side.
You bet he is.
Meanwhile, the practice manager from hell, Sharon, continued to drain money from the business. Companies that Perry had done business with for many years refused their orders because there were outstanding bills that weren't paid. Barb, the old practice manager, learned that Sharon had stopped paying the bills because that job had bored her. Perry secretly took over the responsibility for the payables then, but money continued to be very tight because whatever Sharon wanted, she got, and Perry would do anything for Sharon.
Wouldn't you think you'd take a little more notice of the books?
Perry?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, here's this practice that's losing patients and hemorrhaging money. It's really going down the tubes. And it's not until they finally figure out that Sharon's not been paying the bills that they take action. I mean, this is something that he knew for a long time. Maybe not specifically that she was doing what she was doing, but things were not going well in his formerly very lucrative practice.
Well, and this is all part of the thread through the story that I mentioned in the intro, is you have these intelligent people, and she's not so bright, and she's very careless, but still she's able to pull off these things.
Yeah, she was.
And a lot of it with the men was the sexuality. And Perry was the kind of guy that was really important to.
It worked with Perry.
Yeah.
During this time, where there's all this strife in the practice, I guess the sex in the marriage was going okay. But Sharon developed a new goal. She wanted to feel even better about herself, and she wanted a new house. She wanted her house. So as luck would have it, this new house is going to be located in Weston, which is a tiny hamlet about 30 miles from Trinidad. Wet Canyon in Weston was the ideal place for Sharon's dream home. So she and Perry purchased 35 acres of land above the canyon. Sharon thought this would be the perfect place to raise the perfect family, which now included an infant daughter named Misty, born in 1980.
Okay, so she has the two daughters she left behind.
So she has Rochelle and Denise.
And she has the boy and the girl with her that she had with Perry.
Yeah.
So a baby and a 2-year-old.
Yeah. What was his name? Dennis, I think.
So Sharon was the focal point for the house, though. It was all about her. She wanted it to be big, grandiose, and one of a kind, just as she saw herself, she said. And the big focal point was a 6-sided great room that had this soaring cathedral ceiling. It would also have a wraparound deck 8 feet wide by 120 feet long. And the master bedroom was pretty big, 16 by 28 feet, with a cathedral ceiling and its own outside entrance. The fact that there was no running water or telephone lines was immaterial to her. That could be taken care of. And then she decided she would call this Roundhouse. That would be, every big house has to have its own name.
Yeah, like Tara. So the Nelsons' nearest neighbors were Ray and Candace Thornton. He was a real estate developer, and she was a kindergarten teacher. Ray took an instant dislike to Sharon. She seemed loud, a little mouthy, as she talked about plans for her house, he said.
Now, through this whole story of Sharon, I really feel that the Thorntons were the most common sense people that really seemed to get it. No one else really seemed to get it.
No. And we'll see some examples of that.
Absolutely.
As we talk some more. But Candace befriended Sharon and did okay with her, but she eventually came to Ray's point of view. But Ray knew right away.
Ray was very insightful, yes. Smart guy.
Yeah, so they get the house built, and the Thorntons were invited for dinner. So they come in, and they're just looking at how elegant the scene is. This dining room table is set with fine china, beautiful linens, flowers. Place looks great.
Mm-hmm.
So they finish the meal. Then little Danny, I might have called him Dennis earlier, but it's Danny.
It's Danny, right?
He came out of the bedroom holding a picture, and he said that this was a picture of him from the day he was born. So he shows it to Candace, and she looks and sees that it's kind of a close-up view of Sharon's genitalia as she's delivering the baby.
Oh, full exposure here.
Full frontal. So over time, Candace began to see her husband's point of view, but she continued to enjoy a casual relationship with Sharon.
Well, I feel like Sharon could be entertaining to be around. She could be fun. I mean, these kind of people can be entertaining.
She was a hoot.
And if you're not in a real intense, family relationship with them, sometimes you can have fun with them.
Right. So one time, Sharon's visiting Candace, and she told Candace the story of how she landed Perry.
Landed, that's strange wording.
Yeah, that's how she said it.
Well, it's honest.
So he's minister of the church, and therefore Mike had the records of all the parishioners. And Seventh-day Adventists tithe. So 10% of your earnings goes to the church. So Sharon went through the list and picked the one who tithed the most, and that was Perry.
That's hilarious.
Well, Candace was listening quite attentively, but inside, she's pretty shocked. And, she's thinking, God, this seems so calculated.
How calculated can you get?
I don't think you can get much more, can you?
I mean, I realize she went after him for the money, but this is just so blatant that she actually looked for specific finances.
Yeah.
That's amazing to
I mean,
me.
what if he was really ugly?
I don't know if she would have cared. She would have got sick of him, but I think she certainly would have married him for the money regardless.
Yeah, I think money was paramount.
Absolutely, I think so. Now, she did have a beautiful singing voice, and she performed at the church and sometimes at weddings. She didn't have a piano at her house, so a local woman offered Sharon a chance to practice on her piano. The first time Sharon was there, she was wearing slacks and quite sensible top. But the second time she wore short shorts. And the third time she wore short shorts and a very see-through revealing blouse. So the woman was suspicious. She said she needed to run an errand, but told Sharon to go ahead and practice. The woman left and returned a short time later. And she found her husband and Sharon going at it, which I guess means having sex, when she came home. Hot and heavy going at it. I think they were doing it.
Maybe some nudity?
Absolutely. Because the woman actually picked up a broom and beat Sharon with a broom. So something serious was going on there.
Yeah.
And this would be a guy she just bumped into, right? She didn't know this guy before at all.
No, but that's how she worked.
She liked sex. I think she calculated for money and she liked the attention, but I think she did enjoy sex too.
Yeah, she did.
Quite a bit, yeah. So perhaps not surprisingly, the marriage between Sharon and Perry was floundering. Sharon did what came naturally to her and took up with a man. His name was Buzz Reynolds, and she moved into his house with him. She told friends she wanted a divorce from Perry.
Yeah, and to make matters worse, Buzz is one of Perry's best friends out there.
Well, he's not a very good friend.
No.
If he's hooking up with his wife.
Well, it's just sex.
No, because she left him. This was a relationship. Now, Buzz was a little bit older. He was 10 years older than Sharon, and he was kind of a plain-looking guy. But he was another guy who had money, and he was single.
Yeah, so he qualified.
Yeah, because Perry doesn't have much money left. Now, not long after she left Perry, Sharon arrived at his office to pick up a paycheck for work that she had performed there. Now, she and Perry got into a heated argument over money and about her promiscuity and about the state of their marriage. They just started out and out fighting. So as she stormed out, Sharon said to Barb, "I'll tell you what, if that son of a bitch doesn't give me a divorce, I'll blow his fucking head off. I'll kill him." Just blowing off steam, or did she mean it? It's hard to say. It's quite a thing to say, though.
But yeah.
Pretty severe.
I don't think I'd be blabbing that to my office staff.
No, of course not. She's inappropriate socially, of course, but do you think she really was threatening his life? Would you take that as a serious threat?
At the time, with the circumstances, no. I'd just say she's pissed off. So his personal life and his professional life were falling apart. And Perry took to alcohol.
He took very heavily to alcohol.
He did. And he's getting deeper and deeper into this downward spiral. Perry told Barb one day that he was considering suicide. Barb called a good friend of Perry's who went over to see him. And he found Perry sitting in his truck with a loaded revolver and tears streaming down his face. So the friend told Perry that things would get better. And his words calmed Perry. But the friend was dead wrong. Things weren't ever going to get better.
No, so you can see at this point, this guy's in a bad way. And I think he was a jerk, but I don't think he was an evil person. And I think he probably meant well with Sharon. You know, they had a couple kids. It wasn't like it was just a fling.
I think at the beginning, yeah. Perry's looking at this as he's married his true love.
I think so.
And he's going to make it work.
And he's got these two very young children who he probably didn't see much of at that point.
Perry just wasn't prepared for the evilness of Sharon.
Well, no, and how could you be? You'd have to be a really tough motherfucker, right? Because she was terrible.
She was. And she got away with it.
For a long time, yeah.
So Christmas came around. Perry called Sharon and said, come over to the roundhouse, celebrate the holiday with your family. Now, Sharon told Perry that not only would she not come for the holiday, she wasn't ever going back to him. And she was pregnant with Buzz Reynolds' child.
That's a low blow.
Yeah, but then things weren't going so well with Buzz, because after the holidays, Sharon calls Perry and begs him to allow her to return home. Apparently, when she told Buzz she was pregnant, he kicked her out of his house.
And she was lying anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah.
She was. And Perry, though, refused at this point to take her back. So Sharon was forced to live in a really decrepit apartment in town.
Well, I give Perry a lot of credit at that point.
Yeah, but he eventually caved.
Yeah, because he was still in love with her.
But at least at the time, he said, no, I don't want you back.
Now, his youngest daughter from Julie, of his older children, was living in Montana and was preparing for her wedding. Despite her estrangement from Perry, she loved her dad and she invited him. After a good deal of soul-searching, Perry did agree to attend. The reunion between them really exceeded both of their expectations, and Perry walked Lori down the aisle. But on this happy day in her life, Lori really saw a lot of sadness in her father's eyes. He was not doing well.
No, he was a beaten down man.
Yeah.
Springtimes were just times for renewal. So Sharon really bought into this belief.
Yeah, she's really into renewing things, you mean?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's telling friends she's tired of Buzz. She's tired of living in some cruddy apartment. And nobody knows how she did it, but somehow she charmed her way back into Perry's good graces. And Perry, this poor fool, acted as though he had never stopped loving her, acted as if she had just returned from a prolonged vacation.
Well, he had never stopped loving her, in my opinion.
No, he hadn't. And at least outwardly, he seemed happy. Now, his family and friends, however, knew better. Sharon confided to her friends that Perry only wanted her back to be his maid. He only wanted to use her. The funny thing, though, is Perry's friends felt the same way about her.
So the door to Roundhouse, her big house, was opened up and this beautiful woman smiled. It was just a few weeks after Sharon and Perry had reconciled. So Sharon's long hair was pulled back and it was just beautiful. Her blouse was opened at the neck, past the first button, and the second, which revealed her full breasts. So Gary Adams thought this was something to be seen. Although Gary knew who she was, he had never met Sharon. He had asked her if he could borrow a wheelbarrow for some work he was doing along Wet Canyon Road. And Gary, his wife, and their son lived in a mobile home at the bottom of the ridge. So maybe it happened then, or maybe it happened a bit later. Neither of them would say for sure, but there was no doubt that there was a little bit of an attraction there. A little bit of like fire burning between Gary and Sharon from the beginning.
Right from the start.
Yeah. And Gary's a simple guy. So I think he was easy to manipulate.
Yeah, he was.
These are...
I mean, he's the type of guy...
He's a regular working guy.
That Sharon went for.
Oh, yeah. What did she call him? Her mountain man?
Her mountain man.
Yeah.
But this was her true love. And really, I think he might have been. They survived a lot of ups and downs together.
Yeah, it was twisted, but I think they really were into each other.
Yeah. Now, ever since the Nelsons had reconciled, Barb knew that her days at the office were numbered.
Well, yeah, you would think that Sharon would want to get rid of Barb.
She would, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think Barb wanted to work with Sharon.
Well, I wouldn't blame her for that either.
So she got laid off in June of 1982. Now, Barb knew she had a difficult road ahead of her, but at least she had the benefit of unemployment insurance. At least that's what she thought. So a month after she submitted her application, she got a letter back stating there were no benefits available because unemployment taxes hadn't been paid by the practice for over a year.
Now, wouldn't Perry have to know about that? I mean, she'd worked for him for 17 years, so he'd had a business for a while, and he doesn't know that he needs to pay his unemployment taxes? Or do you think
he knew
was...
that, but Sharon was writing the paychecks.
Well, I just would think he would have to know that. Like you said, you think he'd keep a better eye on things.
I would, yeah. And I would think that he would have learned. I mean, he must have had an accountant who did stuff. And
Well, it doesn't sound like it, though.
Somehow I would have expected to be learning of or being notified that I hadn't been paying unemployment taxes. Because what Sharon was doing was writing a check, and on the check the taxes were taken out. But Sharon's just keeping the money. So if you looked at the books, it looked like unemployment taxes had been paid.
Well, and I think another thing to consider is these are actual books, pad and paper, which are easy to change around. It's easier to commit fraud. But Barb, anyway, she went ahead and confronted Perry about this, and he swore to her that he had been paying the taxes. But then when he spoke to Sharon, who'd been in charge of payroll, he found out, and he was quite embarrassed by the fact, that she hadn't paid the unemployment taxes for a total of 13 months. She'd actually been deducting them from Barb's paycheck, but not paying them. Now, she could have been sent to jail at that point. He could have called the police, but he didn't do it.
Nope.
So then Sharon had this big idea that she wanted to throw a party at her beautiful new home to show the locals that despite all the rumors about her, she was a very lovable person. So she does want approval from people.
She always wanted approval.
Yes. About 20 friends and neighbors attended a Halloween party. Perry was a guru in a long robe. Sharon looked like some kind of Scarlett O'Hara of the Rockies. Reminds me of that other case we did where there was a woman who was really into Scarlett O'Hara.
Yeah, the people in Atlanta.
Yeah, who was she?
Pat something or other.
Oh, yeah. But there was a one-man band performing, and on this big decorated cake it was written, "Play it again, Sam." So while the partygoers danced and enjoyed this evening, Sharon kept her eyes on the man she'd wanted since she first met him. And that was the mountain man, Gary Adams. But it was funny because he was actually dressed as a mountain man.
Yeah, and at this point, I mean, Sharon and he hadn't started any of their affair or anything.
No, but she was lusting after him.
He wasn't her mountain man then.
So what is a mountain man? Is that like a Paul Bunyan? Is that what you would dress in?
Yeah, Grizzly Adams.
Yeah, like a flannel shirt and jeans.
Yeah, buckskins, hat. You're out carrying an axe and all that stuff, you know.
And that turned her on.
Apparently.
So he had a few rum and cokes and ended up dancing with Sharon. And as they were dancing, Sharon began pressing her breasts against him. And she said, "Why don't you come to the office on Thursday and get an eye exam, and we'll get to know each other a little better."
I'm impressed by the subtlety of that.
Yeah, now eye exam means...
I examine you? No.
Maybe.
Come to the optometrist's office, you might be due for an eye exam.
Yeah.
That's just a subterfuge to get him there.
Well, yeah, but I just wondered if there's shorthand for what that actually means.
I think you're reading too much into it.
Okay.
But it could be. I think the eye exam would be, I am examining you.
Well, she was good at flirting and getting her point across to men.
Yes, she was.
So let's take a moment for our sponsor right here. It's for one of my favorite beauty products, which is Madison Reed Hair Color. So Madison Reed is a company that is founded by a woman and a mother, Amy Arrett, and she named it after her daughter, Madison. The way she's managed to bring together salon quality along with affordability to give women beautiful multidimensional hair color at home is really revolutionizing the way that women are coloring their hair. I've said this before, but when I was younger, I was kind of a frequent hair color changer, and I experimented with many over-the-counter drugstore boxed hair colors. Looking back, it's actually hilarious, and me and my girlfriends from back then have had some good laughs at our different hair color disasters. But I can tell you that at the time, it wasn't all that amusing or fun. But going to the salon also isn't easy because it's very expensive and time-consuming, especially if you work full-time outside the home or if you have young kids you're raising, or even both. I mean, who has 2 hours to spend in a salon every 4 to 6 weeks? Not to mention the cost. But when you use Madison Reed, you're going to look like you just walked out of a salon. It's convenient at-home hair color with an ammonia-free salon quality formula. Experience beautiful hair color without breaking the bank or even leaving your home. Madison Reed is made in Italy, and they deliver it right to your door, and the cost is under $25. You can find your perfect shade at madison-reed.com. They do have a lot of choices. I've actually been considering going a little red. Now, I really love how Madison Reed has hair models of all ages and sizes on their website, too. It's a product developed by a real woman and marketed to us real women. And if that isn't cool enough, Madison Reed is honoring our True Crime Brewery listeners by giving us 10% off plus free shipping on your first color kit just by using the promo code BREWERY. The website is madison-reed.com, and our code again is BREWERY. And as always, I'll put a link at the bottom of our show notes.
Okay, so back to the story. Gary certainly is intrigued by this offer from Sharon, right?
Well, he was attracted to her. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
He was.
So he presented himself to the office on that Thursday. Sharon took him into a back room, and they very quickly started making out. Before things went too far, Sharon suggested a hotel room, so he did that. Sharon comes over, and they resume their makeout session. But there was a problem that arose pretty quickly.
Or didn't arise.
Or didn't arise. Yes. Gary couldn't get an erection. So nothing worked. They ended up hugging and kissing, but no sexual intercourse, because it was kind of a limp little noodle. Still, Sharon said she wanted to see him again, and he later said that at that precise moment was when he was hooked by her.
Because she was okay with the lack of erection?
Yep. She wasn't laughing at him, making fun of him.
I'm going to tell you right off, these two really gross me out. Okay. And I don't even want to talk about them. I know we have to.
So they met several times over the next few weeks, always with the same results. Try as he might, he just couldn't get an erection. Maybe there's something going on there that's telling you something, right?
Yeah, maybe he should have listened to his penis.
Yeah, you know how you listen to that little brain too often.
Right. But this time the little brain was trying to warn him.
Yeah, maybe. But Sharon didn't act as if she minded too much, and they continued to meet. Then finally, in the spring of 1983, on a plateau above Trinidad Lake, Gary rose to the occasion. You like that choice of words?
No, it grosses me out.
Now, over time, Gary discovered what it took for his lover to be satisfied. And he also discovered that he craved oral sex with Sharon. So close your ears here, Jill. She tasted so good, he told her friend, I called it her special sauce. I'm not going to mention special sauce anymore.
Thank you. Now, for Gary and Sharon, it was sex and promises. And this only led to trouble, because the more they were together, the more Sharon denigrated Perry. She said he was abusive to her and her children, which there was no evidence of that. Now, he was suspicious of her affair, and he said that he would kill her if he found out for sure. Well, she said.
Sharon said that.
Sharon said that. So Gary, because she told him that, felt sorry for her. And he actually said, he brought it up. Have you ever thought of him having an accident? So we all say that, we've been saying that Sharon lured Gary into doing what he did. But he seemed kind of open to it. Although maybe he was kidding at that point. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure he was serious.
Right.
Until Sharon really started pressing the subject and they started getting more concrete plans. Although they weren't really good plans, but we'll see.
Well, a little bit more about him is that he was just this average guy, like I mentioned. He'd married his wife Nancy back in 1962, and he worked as a general contractor. They lived in a mobile home that had been added on to, so not a ton of money there. But he was an outdoorsman. He liked to hunt and fish and have a few beers with his buddies. So he was generally content with his life when he met Sharon. He liked his life and he wasn't looking for anything better, but then Sharon did show up. Now at the same time, Gary considered Perry a friend in the beginning, but he was able to compartmentalize his actions to keep his guilt at bay. The fact that he was having sex with Perry's wife made no difference as far as the two men's friendship was concerned.
Yeah, I don't see how.
Well, he's
I
keeping
know
the two
that,
separate.
But I don't see how you can.
You really can't, not for any long period of time
No.
anyway. But when Perry needed help on a project, Gary was helpful. He would pour concrete, do things like that for him. With his optometry practice going down the tubes, Perry was looking for ways to save some money. So he moved his office because the rent was a lot less, only $35 a month at the new office.
That's a pretty good deal, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a bargain. But even with this, Perry was often late paying his bills. And everyone in town knew the reason was Sharon, because she was spending money as though she had an unlimited supply. At the same time, though, people were leaving his practice in droves. So Perry's income was declining, and something was going to give here. You can't do that forever.
No, you can't. Things are just going down and down. And they're not going to end well for Perry. He's at the least going to lose his practice.
Right, exactly.
Maybe worse.
Exactly.
So during one of their trysts, Sharon told Gary that the only way out of her miserable life was to get rid of Perry. Well, of course. So
Now, when the conversation turns to this, just leave. All
Yeah,
right? Don't
right?
even play
You
around.
say, you got to be kidding me.
Right.
But she told Gary of the time during her estrangement from Perry when she and a friend got Perry drunk and then rolled him into the pool to drown. So they leave him lying face down in the pool, but he did wake up and climbed out of the pool, which scared the shit out of Sharon.
So she tried to kill him before is basically what she's admitting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this isn't a joke.
No, not to Sharon.
No.
So she's apparently convinced Gary that we got to kill Perry.
Yeah, so he's going to go along with it. But his
Yeah.
first attempt doesn't go well.
No, it didn't.
But they didn't really have a very concrete plan.
They had really a stupid plan, which was no plan.
Yeah.
So the way Gary was looking at it, he and a friend were going to meet Perry on the highway to Denver by accident, which they did. I mean, it wasn't by accident. They planned to meet him because they knew he was going to Denver.
But they wanted Perry to think it was by chance.
Yep. So they decided to go to a tavern. They had a few beers and then said, I got a good idea. Let's go to a strip club. And Gary's plan had firmed up. So at the strip club, Gary's friend is going to slip some knockout drops into Perry's beer. Then they'd go outside and they'd finish him off. Perry, however, didn't cooperate with this. He took one sip of the beer with the knockout drops and said, nah, something's wrong with it. So they left the strip club. They were going to sleep in their cars overnight to save money. And at this point, Gary said, screw it, I'm not going to try to do anything.
Well, because he was just tired and drunk, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So imagine how surprised Sharon was when Perry returns home again, still alive. So he's gotten out of the swimming pool and he's walked away from death off the highway.
Right. So these two were opportunities for her to reconsider what she's doing and think maybe this isn't the best idea.
Not our Sharon.
But that's not the way it went with her. She became increasingly upset in the following days, really not happy about her husband's return. And Sharon really lit into Gary for botching that plan. So Gary said he would do it again, but they might have to wait a little while. But Sharon said, no way in hell, this is happening soon. Perry's got another meeting up in Denver in July, and this would be a good time to do it. So that was what they agreed on.
Then a few days later, Sharon invited Gary and Nancy to join her and Perry for dinner at the Roundhouse.
Now at that point, I think she just likes to flaunt it,
Yeah,
right? Because she didn't need to have the couple over.
she doesn't.
She's just enjoying it. She likes having the secret.
I think so. So, and typically, they finish dinner, the women are staying in the kitchen, and Perry and Gary go outside to shoot the breeze, do man talk.
Uh-huh.
So Gary told Perry that he heard Perry was going to Denver soon, and he was wondering if he could catch a ride. Gary said he had a line on procuring some guns called Mini 14s. These are one of the popular guns in the area. Several guys own them and thought they were ideal for shooting coyotes and even deer. So a week later, they were off to Denver. They stopped at a Burger King in Pueblo and then continued on their trip. As they proceeded, it began to rain heavily, and when they got to a spot where Clear Creek was a raging torrent, Gary asked Perry to pull over so he could take a leak.
And this is all part of the plan. So it was around 4 a.m. when Gary made it back to his home, and his body was sore and he was wired and agitated, and he was telling himself Perry was dead, that he had taken care of him, but he couldn't be sure of it. So around 9 a.m., Gary couldn't wait any longer. He told his wife Nancy that they were going to spend the night in a nearby town, and on the way he wanted to stop at Perry's since he owed Gary some money. So Sharon answered the door and told Gary, and Gary told her everything's all set. But when he told Sharon the story of how he had killed Perry, Gary sometimes altered the story. So Sharon would say later she really didn't know what to believe. So that's why we don't really know what happened. That's why I'm skipping ahead. All I know is that he said he had to pull over, and then the story varies. Because doesn't Gary give at least 3 different stories?
There's a few different stories.
Yeah.
But the one that was the most plausible was that it was raining. They stopped at a parking strip next to Clear Creek, which was a lot more than a creek at that point.
Kind of a whitewater rafting type of place almost,
Right.
Yeah.
So Gary says, I'm going to go pee. He goes to the water's edge and got a big rock that weighed 15, 20 pounds. Then he goes back to the car and he tells Perry that he lost his wallet. Could you come help me find it? So they go back to the creek. They're looking around. Gary picks up the rock and smacks Perry on the head with it.
Wow,
Perry fell down, but wasn't knocked unconscious. And they get into this big struggle. Eventually both guys are in the water. Then all of a sudden the current grabbed Perry and he was gone. So Gary got back to the car, drove it a few miles and ditched it in the creek. Then he called a friend who picked him up and drove him home.
Because they'd been riding in Perry's car, right? Okay.
So that's the likely story as it turned out. But let's back up and see what was going on in the early stages after his disappearance, after Perry's disappearance.
Okay.
So Bob and Donna Goodhead, that were good friends of Perry's, they were on their way to an optometry convention in Denver, and they had been planning to stop and see Perry and Sharon. Bob had an optometry practice in Tulsa, and he and Perry had been good friends for many years. And in fact, Bob had purchased some land from Perry back when Perry first began to have financial difficulties. So the Goodheads really liked Perry, but they barely tolerated Sharon. So there they are at the door. Sharon answers the door and says that Perry should be home soon. She invites them in. Hours go by. No Perry. Then they heard that there had been heavy rains in the Denver area. And Sharon said, well, maybe that's why Perry's late. And then during this conversation, Sharon casually drops this bomb. Bob, I don't believe you'll ever see your friend Perry again.
What the fuck?
Yeah, and this kind of came out of left field.
Yeah.
So this put a stop to further conversation.
That's crazy.
Around 10 o'clock, the Goodheads left. Then they returned the next morning. Perry still wasn't home. So they go down the mountain where there was a phone. None of Perry's friends had heard from him. They next called the police, found there was no record of a wreck involving a black Volkswagen Bug. So the Goodheads gave Sharon their phone cards so she could continue to make calls, because remember, there's no telephone service up at the roundhouse.
Right.
And they left to continue on to the meeting that they were going to in Denver.
Yeah, but they really feared that something bad had happened to Perry.
Yeah.
And what about that comment? So the comment really made Donna feel like Sharon knew more than she'd let on. She actually remarked that to her husband at the time.
Yeah.
Because that's a strange thing to say. Very strange.
Isn't it?
And then he turns up not showing up. That's really weird.
Very weird.
So that same morning, about 250 miles away, a jogger running along Clear Creek came across the mangled remains of Perry's car. So the car was battered as if it had been in a rock tumbler, and Perry wasn't inside of it. A search party was organized and they drove up to Denver with Sharon. The next day they went with an officer to where the accident most likely occurred, and they searched the stream, but they didn't find Perry's body. When the group returned to Trinidad, Sharon asked if she could stay with some friends of Perry, saying she didn't want to be driving back and forth. She also told the husband and wife that she needed money and was considering selling some of Perry's belongings, his guns, for example. Now, let's just remember he's only been missing a day or two.
Short time.
And she wants to sell off his stuff. The next day, Gary Adams showed up, and Sharon introduced him as her neighbor and Perry's really good friend. Over the next week, Gary was a very frequent visitor at the Whitney residence, and Jim Whitley began to suspect that there was something going on between Sharon and Gary. As she continued to sell off Perry's assets, and she had this attitude of serenity, friends began to wonder if Perry's death was just a setup. They really wouldn't put it past Sharon to involve Perry in some sort of scam. So they're not thinking he's dead, they're thinking he's pretending to be dead for financial gain, I guess.
That's one of the thoughts.
Yeah. But they definitely think that Sharon was screwing around with Gary Adams.
Yeah, and they think that Sharon was behind Perry's disappearance.
Yeah.
So Gary moves in with Sharon almost as soon as she returned to Roundhouse. Pretty quick. The consensus was that Gary really didn't know what he was getting into. And as much as she professed her love for her mountain man, Sharon didn't waste much time making him over. Washed his hair, blow-dried it, styled it. She had a bunch of lotions and balms for him. And she went out and bought him a new wardrobe. A lot of them with skin-tight pants to better show off his attributes. Now, beyond the sex, she and Gary had little in the way of bliss in their relationship. Sharon ruled the roost. There wasn't anything Gary did that satisfied her, except for the sex.
Well, and he's a normal working guy.
Yeah.
Although now he's a murderer, or at least an attempted murderer. So you can't be that easy on him. Sure, she's running things, but he's very willingly going along with it. She's not holding a gun to his head. So after a couple months of them living together, Gary told Sharon he was moving back home with his wife. Well, you can imagine she didn't take that well. But the wife was giving Gary a second chance. Now Sharon did agree because things really weren't working out with them as a couple. And besides, by this time, she'd rekindled her old affair with Buzz Reynolds.
Yeah, remember?
The guy from before.
Guy from before who apparently or supposedly kicked her out.
When she said she was pregnant. Yeah. Now she would say that Buzz wasn't quite as good in bed as Gary was, but he had more money. I mean, Gary really doesn't have money.
But Buzz is, for that area, a pretty wealthy guy.
Right. Now Perry's parents are doing all that they can do to help Sharon and the grandchildren through these difficult times since Perry disappeared. They sent money whenever Sharon asked, and they took Danny and Misty, the little kids, on vacations with them. Now Mrs. Nelson wrote Sharon and said they were coming to Colorado for a visit, and they were really looking forward to spending time with her and the grandkids. Sharon called Mrs. Nelson and said she was glad they were coming, but she had some plans that she just couldn't break. So she told her mother-in-law that they could come, but they'd only be able to stay for one night, which was kind of ridiculous if they're going to come all that way for one night. So they just canceled the trip.
Yeah. Now, if Sharon had kept her shenanigans to her own home, that would have been one thing, but she followed the same pattern almost every time. And that was be friendly with the couple, especially the wife. Then when the wife was committed to this relationship with Sharon, she'd have sex with the woman's husband. Good M.O.
Yeah, but she never really was that friendly with Nancy.
No, they didn't like each other.
No. A lot of women didn't like her because she was just too out there, and they could tell she was out to screw their husbands. And Sharon and Gary had this kind of love-hate relationship that continued because they couldn't be together as a couple, but they couldn't be apart because they wanted to have sex together. So they were together nearly 13 months after Perry's disappearance when they were actually pulled over by the sheriff. And the deputy said that he needed to speak to Sharon away from the kids who were in the back seat. The sheriff told Sharon they'd found Perry's body along a sandbar, and there were some discrepancies because the body looked very well preserved for someone who'd spent a year in the wilderness, and his clothes were unscathed. And also the body appeared to be a man in his 30s, and Perry was 50 when he disappeared. So due to these discrepancies, Dr. Mitchell, who was a friend of Perry's and another doctor, called the coroner's office and asked if he could look at the body. But he was told that wasn't possible, but he could call back on Monday and speak with the coroner himself. But when he did that, he was told that the body had already been cremated. He was told that Sharon viewed the body, and had said it was Perry. But this is really hard to believe because it was a younger person, and if Perry had fallen into that creek, he would have been beat to hell.
He would have been.
His body would have been torn up, not to mention the decomposition that would have taken place.
Right. But somehow Sharon finagled things. And I'm pretty sure that it wasn't Perry whose body was found. I'm not sure who it was.
Well, do you think that they went out and killed someone else so there would be a body found, though? That's the question.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good thought.
Or is it just some kind of strange coincidence? Because most detectives will tell you there are no coincidences.
Right. And it couldn't have been that it was Perry's body that had been laying on that sandbar for all that time.
No.
Because somebody would have seen him.
Plus, the body wasn't in a state to have been there that long.
Right.
So I don't understand why the coroner even went along with that.
No, me either. But in the end, it was declared to be Perry's body.
Right.
And this was going to be good news for Sharon.
Well, that's what she wanted, sure.
A body meant more money, right?
Yeah, without the body, she wasn't really getting any money except selling off his stuff.
Yeah. So Sharon started collecting on the insurance policies that she had taken out on Perry. And she'd had like a half dozen policies drawn up. Without him knowing, she forged his name.
Which in and of itself is extremely suspicious.
Yep. So, but she's sharing the money with her lover, Gary.
Kind of doling a little bit out to him here and there,
Yeah.
right? She's in charge of it.
She was. So Gary was going to save his share, and Sharon was going to spend hers as fast as it came in. So although she had all the money she'd ever wanted or dreamt about, at least for the time, she still wanted one more thing. She wanted Gary to divorce his wife and marry her. And she couldn't understand why this hadn't happened. Gary kept putting her off. He thought it was better financially just to live together.
Instead of marrying?
Yeah, because she'd lose some Social Security benefits and
right.
stuff.
But he also had some kind of loyalty to Nancy.
He did.
I don't know if it was just guilt or if he actually cared about her, but he did feel some kind of loyalty there. Now, Sharon's oldest daughter, Rochelle, had been raised by her father, Mike Fuller, the minister, back in Ohio. And even though there was this deep bitterness between them, there was also this connection, because it's her daughter. So when Rochelle was 15, she went to live with her mom in Colorado. And as she was with her stepdaughter, Lori, Sharon would act more like a friend than a mother with these teens. So she and Rochelle loved watching movies together and eating popcorn. But it's just really funny to note that Rochelle would say later Sharon's favorite movie was Black Widow. So that's the movie with, is it Karen Russell? Carrie Russell?
No, someone Russell.
Deborah Winger.
Deborah Winger and Ms. Russell. It's not Karen Russell.
No. All right, but it's a movie with Deborah Winger where there's this Black Widow. She marries rich men, she kills them, right?
Right.
And the tagline is she mates and she kills. And according to Rochelle, Sharon was just obsessed with that movie, would watch it over and over again, which is quite telling.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah. Now, Rochelle couldn't even begin to keep track of all the men that were in her mom's life at that time either. Gary was off again, on again. Sharon had told her parents that she would marry again, and this time it was going to be to Buzz Reynolds.
Oh, that Buzz, the same Buzz Reynolds, huh?
Yeah. So Sharon...
Talk about off again, on again.
Well, plus, we're not even mentioning all these other men that came and went during this time period, right? These are just kind of the main ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Sharon's parents, perhaps thinking this time things would be different, came out to Colorado for the wedding. But what they saw was no Buzz around, but lots of Gary. So this was just too much for them. So they're coming out there to see their daughter marry Buzz. But Gary's hanging around and in the bedroom and everything. Now, these are religious people. They're disgusted. They gather up their things and leave before the ceremony even takes place. But the ceremony did take place. It was a beautiful Colorado day, and Sharon and Buzz were married. Now, Sharon was married to Buzz, but she still had her mountain man in her life. And one afternoon, after some vigorous lovemaking, Sharon said to Gary, "Buzz needs to have an accident." Now, Gary thought this was ridiculous. I mean, it had only been 2 years since Perry disappeared. So even Gary, simple Gary, realizes how suspicious this will be if she marries this other guy and then he dies.
Exactly.
And it turns out that this wasn't even a legal marriage to Buzz.
No, it was more of a ceremony, like a commitment ceremony or something.
But she must have had some life insurance on him because she's asking Gary to kill him right away.
Yeah, she must have had something going.
But Gary said no, he wasn't going to do that, at least not so soon.
So I got a new character to introduce, okay?
Okay.
Guy
I
named
can keep them straight.
Bart Mason is this guy's name. He'd been hired by a friend to help put up sheetrock in Sharon's home, and he was always amazed at how Sharon acted. Now, Sharon's daughter Rochelle, who was living with her mother at that time, looked a lot like Sharon. So the first day he's at work, he works all day, and he's getting ready to commute back to Trinidad and return the next morning, and Sharon told him he could spend the night at her house, which sounded like a good idea to Bart, because he wouldn't have to drive back and forth. Now, in fact, Sharon said, "You can sleep downstairs with Rochelle." Sounds like an invitation, doesn't it? Sounds like you're kind of pimping your daughter out.
Kind of. How else would you take it?
So that first night, Bart slept and didn't do anything with Rochelle.
So is he actually putting him in the same bed with her daughter?
Same room, but in time, they became sexually active. And Rochelle's like 15, 16 years old.
Right, and he's like, he's young, but he's
young.
still an adult.
He's been through community college,
He's
so
like
he's probably 20, 21. So they started dating, having sex.
Well, he's practically living there, right? Kind of?
He is.
Yeah.
He basically is living there. And about 4 months into the relationship, Sharon one day asked Bart, "Is Rochelle good in bed?" And now there's a cool comment from your mom.
That's so gross.
So Bart just turned away and left.
Well, Bart's coworker, Harry, was available to Sharon whenever she didn't have Buzz or Gary around, so there's another guy. Sharon invited Harry to move in with her after another fight she had with Buzz, and he quickly acted like he owned the place. So Harry and Bart were having frequent confrontations in the home. And a couple days after one of these episodes, Harry stormed into a restaurant that was owned by Bart's parents. He grabbed Bart, but said he only wanted to talk to him and not fight. And he told Bart he was leaving the area. But when Bart asked why, Harry said, "Last night in bed, Sharon said she had Perry killed for $50,000. And if I didn't move out, she'd have me killed too." So Harry left Trinidad. But the gossip was that Sharon had given him $5,000 and a truck to keep quiet before he left. So he didn't go to the police.
No. So Sharon continued her relationships, such as they were, with both Gary and Buzz. And Perry's youngest daughter, Lori, continued to be fixated on Sharon, and she needed some closure from Sharon. Wanted to confront her stepmother. So she came down for a visit from Montana, and she convinced a childhood friend to drive her out to Buzz's place. So when they got there, Sharon's car was there, but Sharon wasn't. And Buzz, who appeared pretty sad and dejected, told him that Sharon was moving back to Denver, and Rochelle was coming for the car. Gary was going to move to Denver with her, and they were going to get married. One day in December, Bart's outdoors working, and Sharon and Rochelle came up to him. Sharon says, "Rochelle wants a commitment. Will you marry her?" "Yes," Bart found himself saying. Sharon thought a double wedding would be nice.
So she was going to marry Gary again? Or I guess she'd never married
She
him,
hadn't ever married him. She'd finally convinced him
to get
to
married.
leave his wife and marry her.
So she's going to marry Gary, and she's going to have her, 16-year-old daughter and marry Bart, the work guy?
Yep.
Okay.
2 matches made in heaven.
Right. Now, the morning they were all to leave for Denver, Gary had disappeared, though, and the rest of them went to Denver, and Bart and Rochelle were married in the county clerk's office. Gary did end up in the Denver area visiting his daughter, and he found out that Sharon and the rest of her family had gone through with this move to Denver. And he was relieved, actually, because Sharon wasn't going to be in Trinidad waiting for him. He actually, at this point, wanted to be free from her. He was going to try and repair his relationship with Nancy and try and be a good father to their son. So he backed out.
He backed out. Now I'm going to jump ahead a little bit
Okay.
in the tale, and then we're going to come back to things. So we're going to go to a little Pizza Hut in Walsenburg, Colorado. Gary Traynor and his partner Elaine Tigert are 2 police officers, detectives. So they're going to come down there to meet Sharon to discuss the murder of Sharon's husband, fireman Glenn Harrelson. So we're going to learn all about this stuff.
So she has another husband that ends up dead?
She does have another husband and ends up dead. So Trainer and Tigert felt Sharon was about to confess to Glenn's murder, and they were there to arrest her. Now, Sharon had her own agenda, and she was hoping that this would ease her complicity in whatever crime she had committed. So she begins the conversation by talking about her marriage to Perry, and she told the detectives how tax and financial obligations were consuming the marriage, and she talked about her affair with Gary. Okay, during our marriage, I fell in love with Gary. I don't know why, but I did. It got to the point that I didn't know what to do. Gary said he could arrange for Perry not to be around anymore. So the detectives let Sharon talk, and she told them Gary just wouldn't let go of her. Their off-and-on relationship had destroyed her life. And even when she married Glenn, she couldn't shake Gary's attentions. Gary was jealous. He hated seeing Glenn and Sharon together. He killed for Sharon's love and the money she was going to get.
Okay, so we know that's not true because we were just talking about how Gary backed out of marrying her when she went to Denver.
This is Sharon's story.
Okay. So this is at the point where she was arrested for this husband Glenn's murder?
Yeah, but they've also kind of solved Perry's murder. So Sharon gets arrested. Glenn Trainer, the one cop, drives Sharon's children to Rochelle's house in Trinidad. And while they're waiting for the police from Thornton to arrive, Elaine Tigert rented a room for Sharon next door at the Best Western. And then over the next few days, plans were made by law enforcement to arrest Gary Adams. By that time, Sharon had told the police where they could find the wedding ring Gary had taken from Glenn as proof of his murder, and she also told police that the note Gary had written her about the killing was still in her mailbox. So Gary Adams' dogs couldn't stop barking, and he wondered if a coyote had come down to rustle a chicken. So he's thinking times like this he'd take out his Mini 14 and fire a few rounds at the coyote. But he saw that it was the police arriving. He was glad he didn't reach for his gun. And he had no idea at all what had happened with Sharon at the Pizza Hut in Walsenburg. And it was kind of flabbergasted when he was arrested for first-degree murder. Now, let's go back to when Sharon met Glenn, who became her third husband.
Okay, well, it was late winter of 1987 when Sharon retrieved the local newspaper that had been put in the mailbox of her Denver, Colorado rental home. So she sat down, lit a cigarette, and began leafing through the paper. And one of the bios in the personal ads section caught her attention. This was written by a firefighter named Glenn Harrelson. So this is how she met Glenn. She called up that number. When Glenn returned from his tour in Vietnam, he wanted to make changes in his life. And Glenn had been raised in Des Moines, Iowa. In 1963, he had married Andrea, the girl of his dreams. And in the first year of their marriage, they'd vacationed in Colorado, and he really liked it there. So he and Andy moved to a Denver suburb and eventually had 2 children, a son, Todd, who was born in '69, and a daughter, Tara, 2 years later. After his return from Vietnam, Glenn found his niche and became a firefighter. And he became very well liked and well respected by his peers. Glenn's best friend was a man named Jim, and Jim and his wife Jane became close to the Harrelson family and did a lot of things together. Glenn and Jim joined forces on a carpet and decorating business, and they did so well that they began a car wash business together. And over this time, Glenn's marriage to Andy began to deteriorate, so they separated in Christmas 1984 and were divorced soon after. Glenn found that he was very lonely after this divorce and he wanted to date again. So this is when he joined a singles club. He also bought a toupee. Now one night he was out talking with his friend Jim about the singles scene, and he told Jim that he had met someone through the classified ads. And he said that she was a fun-loving, classy beauty, and her name was Sharon, but she liked to be called Cher. Now Rick Filippi was looking forward to joining Glenn and Sharon for lunch. He'd been seeing less and less of Glenn, and he was a good friend of his. But since Glenn had been dating Sharon, he hadn't seen him that much. So he was anxious to meet this woman that Glenn was all about. So to say this lunch went badly, though, would be quite an understatement. Sharon looked like this homecoming queen who'd gone bad, wearing tight slacks with a cigarette dangling from the corner of her mouth. It was quickly apparent that Sharon didn't want anyone around but her guy Glenn. So she sat between Glenn and Rick, kind of cutting Rick out of the conversation. And made him very uncomfortable, and Rick ended up leaving the lunch without even eating his meal.
So during this time when Glenn's starting to see Sharon, same modus operandi is working. He's losing friends. She's demanding all his attention. He and Sharon did everything together. Sharon complained to Glenn that she didn't like the rental home. So Glenn offered Sharon and her kids a place to stay. They could move into his house on Columbine Court.
Which, of course, was what she was aiming for.
Sure. So this was a hasty arrangement, and it surprised many of Glenn's friends, but nobody said anything to Glenn. No one wanted to ruin his newfound happiness, or apparent newfound happiness.
Glenn's daughter Tara was a teenager when her parents divorced, and like a lot of teens, she had quite a bit of resentment. But she thought Sharon was nice, even though she was a little pushy. And shortly after moving in, Sharon had taken over the house. Now Sharon, of course, had been down this road before, and she knew exactly how to act with a teenage daughter. Glenn and Andy remained friends after the divorce, and she was really happy for him when he told her about Sharon. And it became obvious that this was more than just a fling for him. But the only problem she saw is that she wasn't sure that Sharon wanted to get married again, with one marriage ending in divorce and her second husband dying in an auto accident.
And this is what Sharon said.
That Perry had died in an auto accident, right. Now, Andy thought Sharon's comments were meant to manipulate Glenn, and she thought that Sharon was quite an operator.
Yeah, it was pretty weird. So Andy would go over to Glenn's house to drop off a kid or pick up a kid or talk to Glenn, and Sharon would disappear into the back room. She never met her, but she spoke with her on the phone fairly often, and she was always pleasant and warm. So Andy thought, well, maybe she's just shy. Then one night, late, Andy's phone rang. It was Glenn, sounding ill. Could you come get me and take me to the hospital, he asked. Now, Andy knew that Glenn had been ill with mononucleosis. So she took him to the hospital, but all the time was wondering, where the hell's Sharon? The answer became apparent the next morning when Sharon showed up. So Sharon says, I met an old friend. It's okay if we go out with other people, isn't it? She said that to Glenn, and Andy knew Glenn wanted a monogamous relationship, and she thought that this was just another example of Sharon manipulating Glenn.
Well, absolutely. Other than Rick and another close friend, none of Glenn's other acquaintances had ever even met Sharon. And Glenn was always talking about how wonderful she was. And to a select few, he would say that she was a real tigress in bed. However, even without meeting her, most of Glenn's pals felt that she was a bad influence. Maybe none so more than the fire dispatcher, Dean Hastings. But Sharon's influence extended far and wide. Glenn was spending more and more time with Sharon and less time with friends. So it was a joyous occasion, at least to Glenn's family and friends, when Sharon left Glenn and she returned to Trinidad. Glenn told his friend Rick that Sharon was still seeing an ex-lover in Trinidad. And not long after, Glenn and Rick met up again, and he told Rick that he and Sharon were going to get back together. So Rick tried to not badmouth Sharon, but at the same time try and talk some sense into Glenn. But that didn't work. So a couple of weeks later, Glenn ran into a friend at an insurance agency and told her that he and Sharon were getting married. He was at the agency to put Sharon down as his beneficiary.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So on June 2nd, 1988, Sharon came in wearing shorts, sandals, and a tank top. She became Mrs. Glenn Harrelson. After the ceremony, Sharon and Glenn packed up and went to visit his family in Iowa. And there they had a second wedding ceremony at the request of Glenn's mother. So at the start of their marriage, if there were any issues, it was always that Sharon took credit for everyone else's accomplishments. And with more time, however, it became apparent that the marriage was going to be a commuter relationship. Glenn had his job in Denver, and Sharon still had Roundhouse in Weston, which she refused to give up. So while Sharon and the kids would stay in Trinidad, Glenn would commute back and forth from Trinidad to Denver. He stayed in the house on Columbine Court when in Denver, and Glenn's friends also began to suspect that there were more than just housing issues that were trouble in the marriage.
Gary Adams heard Sharon and moved back to the area, but he took his time about going to see her. Not that he didn't want to, of course. He just knew that if he did, he'd be a goner. Chance meeting at the bus stop where Sharon was picking up her kids from school started things off. So Gary first told himself he was just going up to Roundhouse to help Sharon grade the driveway. They soon ended up in bed. Gary found out he had the same problem as at their first meeting. He couldn't get an erection. Sharon tried for a couple hours to coax him into getting an erection, but she gave up. And then she complained to Gary about how demanding Glenn was and how he wasn't nice to the kids.
So one time when Glenn was in Trinidad visiting Sharon, they went to visit Bart and Rochelle, the daughter and the guy that she'd married. And Glenn mentioned that he thought someone was breaking into his house in Denver. Now, nothing was ever taken, and whoever was doing it appeared to have a key to the house. It was at Sharon's house in November, 5 months after her marriage to Glenn, that she made her move. While she was snuggling with Gary, she told him it was time to get rid of Glenn. She wanted it done before Thanksgiving because Glenn's mother was planning a visit. And she wanted Gary to bring her Glenn's wedding ring after he killed him. But at the same time, Glenn was becoming suspicious of Sharon. He was fairly sure she was seeing Gary when she was in Trinidad. And Glenn actually told a friend, "This isn't the marriage that I thought it would be. I've made a mistake. I don't think I ever should have married Cher. I don't trust her." So one day, early November 1988, Glenn called his good friend Jim at the fire station. He used the central line, which was used for emergencies. Jim told Glenn to hang up and call back in 5 minutes on the other line. And Glenn said he would, but he never did call back.
Yeah, and everyone's always wondered what he was going to talk to
Jim about? Yeah.
We don't know.
Something had happened.
Yeah.
As Sharon and Gary planned for Glenn's murder, she had a different take on things. She said that Gary was pressuring her, and she never wanted Glenn dead. Gary told Sharon to get him the key to Glenn's house, and he would get the job done, according to her.
That's it. That's how we're going to work it. It's his fault.
Exactly.
So at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on November 18th, 1988, it was starting to snow, and Diane Browning was unloading groceries at her house in Weston when Sharon and her kids pulled up. So by the way Sharon invited herself in, Diane got the impression that she was intending to stay for a while. Now, Sharon seemed pretty happy. She's wearing a Denver Fire Department t-shirt, which she said Glenn had just given her. The snow came down more heavily, but still Sharon and the kids stayed. They had dinner with Diane and her family, watched a couple of videos, and they ended up leaving around 9 o'clock. So that same night, Gary was in the Denver suburb of Thornton looking at Glenn Harrelson's house on Columbine Court. He had a .22 caliber handgun in his pocket and a piece of lead pipe tucked into his belt. So Gary used Sharon's key, entered the house, looked around the house to get the lay of the land, and settled down to wait until Glenn got home. Door opens, Glenn walks in, Gary smacks him on the head with the pipe. Just like Perry, though, Gary went down but wasn't knocked out. So Gary hit him again and again, but still Glenn stayed upright. They began to wrestle each other, and then Gary finally took out his gun and shot Glenn twice. It's over. So Gary's not real good at this killing part of things, is he?
Well, he did do it. But Gary did realize that his original plan of the crime being an accidental death wasn't going to fly with 2 bullets in Glenn, right? So he decided it would have to look like a robbery gone bad at that point. So he went around scattering clothing and other objects around the house. Then he doused it with gasoline. He put a lit cigarette in a book of matches and left it in the house. So when Gary arrived at Sharon's house around 4 a.m., he gave her Glenn's house key and wedding ring. And after trying unsuccessfully to have sex with her again, they went to sleep. So Glenn's friend Jim, his wife answered their phone in the early hours of the morning, and it was a fellow firefighter that wanted to speak with Jim. When Jim heard the news that Glenn was dead and had actually died in a fire, he knew something was totally wrong, of course. And he flashed back to his last conversation with Glenn, and why Glenn had never called him back. What had he wanted to say to him? So Jim called Fire Chief Bob Schneider, and he agreed that there was something very suspicious about Glenn's death. In fact, an investigation was already underway because they knew it was arson. Jim called Andy, Glenn's ex-wife, and Jim, along with other firefighters and policemen, went over to Andy's house to comfort her, and also his children, of course, who were with their mother. She was very shocked, and she asked if Sharon had been notified. This is going to be so hard on Sharon. She just lost another husband not too long ago, she said. But later, after authorities left, Andy would look back on what she had said, and realized, of course, Sharon had been responsible for Glenn's death. And other friends of Glenn were thinking the same thing.
Sharon's son-in-law Bart picked up his phone to hear the voice of Glenn's mother on the other end. This poor old lady had some bad news and was trying to reach Sharon as quickly as possible. So Bart handed the phone to Sharon's daughter, Rochelle, and she learned that Glenn had died. So they quickly went over to the roundhouse and told Sharon what had happened. Sharon broke down in tears, but she collected herself pretty quickly after 9-year-old Danny said, "Mommy, why do all our daddies have to die?"
I wonder if that really happened. That's a little on the nose.
Further north near the scene of the crime, detectives Glenn Trainor and Elaine Tigert were preparing to travel to Trinidad to question Sharon. They drove down the freeway, ended up solving not just one murder, but 2.
So this is when they met her at the Pizza Hut? Well, Perry's daughter Lori came down from Montana to ask Sharon, "Why did you kill my father?" Sharon said she never meant for it to happen. Then she totally trashed Perry's memory. She said Perry had betrayed her by having extramarital affairs on her as well as Julie. Now Lori became infuriated and told Sharon she hated her and stormed out of the jail. So that was her one and only visit to see Sharon in jail. There was no trial for either Sharon or Gary because Sharon pled guilty in 2 counts of first-degree murder, saying she forfeited her right to trials. And she said that she selflessly did that to spare her children. Now others suggested that she did this just to avoid the death penalty, which makes sense.
Yes, it does. More sense.
Gary initially held out, but he also pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder after he learned that Sharon was going to testify against him. And years after her arrest, Sharon would say that her confession was a huge mistake. She was a battered woman who feared for her life. She was the victim. The surviving Nelson children filed a claim against the insurance companies that paid off Sharon, and that verdict was found for the children. 10 years later, after several reversals, the original verdict was upheld. This payout plus interest was divided equally among Perry Nelson's 5 children, and 2 of them were with Sharon.
So Sharon's been in prison since June 1989. Her present address is in the La Vista Correctional Facility, and she's eligible for parole in June 2029.
She still has a ways to go.
She does. She'll be in her 80s. Gary entered prison in July 1989. He's eligible for parole in June 2029. So they're both going to be oldies.
So we never found out if that body was Perry, and if not, what happened to Perry?
Perry died.
You think so?
Yes.
Then why was his body never found? Think just the animals and things got to it?
I think so.
But I do wonder, was that other body someone that they killed to collect the money?
I don't know where they got this other body from, because I don't think that was Perry.
No, I don't think it could have been really, from the description.
Yeah.
So I think that's possible that they killed a stranger just so they could collect.
We'll never know.
Okay, well, it's time for some listener feedback, but first I want to say thank you to our listeners, our Tie Grabber members, our Patreon supporters, and everyone who's taken time to write to us or leave us a voicemail. If you have feedback or a crime that you'd like to suggest, please email us at truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com, or you can direct message us on Instagram or Twitter, or you can leave us a voicemail on our website. Just click on Leave Us a Voicemail. It's on the right side of our website, tiegrabber.com. If you're not a member of Tie Grabber yet, but you're thinking about it, there are really some fascinating cases recently covered in our members-only episodes, and we have some really good ones coming up. So some that we've recently covered are the case of Jill Cahill, which was this really outrageous domestic violence murder by a man, and the case of Clara Harris, who was this very successful dentist who killed her cheating husband by running over him repeatedly with her Mercedes. That's a very well-known one. Now, in the next few months, we'll be covering the murder of Jeannie Butkowski and the disappearance of Samantha Zaldivar. Joining Tie Grabber not only gives you more episodes to listen to, which is great, but it also is a way for you to offer support to the podcast. And you can help to pay for the production and distribution costs that are involved. You can offer this support by joining Team Tie Grabber at tiegrabber.com, or you can do it by becoming a patron at patreon.com/truecrimebrewery. Now, there are also some equally important and cost-free ways to offer support, and those include following us on Twitter at TieGrabberPods, on Instagram, TieGrabberPodcasts, as well as on Facebook. And we also appreciate getting reviews on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast. That helps us out a lot in finding new listeners. Okay, Dick, why don't you go ahead and start off our feedback?
Okay, we have some voice messages first.
Okay, great. I love voice messages. Thank you.
So first is Sarah from Michigan.
Hi, Dick and Jill. I'm Sarah calling from Michigan. And I think I heard that Jill might be from Michigan. So I was thinking if you're ever back in the state, we should maybe plan a little meetup for your Michigan listeners. I thought that'd be really fun. And I have a great sour I would recommend from a brewery called Rock Mill Brewery. It's actually in Ohio. But I had it and I thought, I think Jill would like this. And so I could always throw that in as an incentive for a little meetup, which I think would be really fun. But anyway, I am calling because I love your show. I've got my sister hooked on your show as well. And we talk about each episode afterwards and just love listening to it. Helps me get through my daily chores and all that stuff. But I was actually calling as well because I had a case that I came upon. It actually takes place in Australia, and it's about a girl named Leah. And if you look her up, there's even a Wikipedia article about her. But she was 14 years old and was sexually assaulted and killed at a party. And there's a lot of information about it. But what was interesting to me was how light of a sentence was given to the perpetrators. And I just think that's really interesting, especially after listening to your most recent episode where you talked about, how the perpetrators kept getting out on bail and things in Australia. It's a really different kind of thought process about, to me, it seems that way, the way the justice system works there, which I think which might be an interesting conversation to have. And there's a lot of information about this case. It's really sad. And anyways, I thought that might be interesting. So anyway, I hope you're both enjoying your new place where you're living. And that's what makes me a little sad because we used to live in Maine. And every time I listened to your show, it brought me back to those days. My older two kids were born at Eastern Maine. And I just want to give a little shout out to the Raising Readers program that they have in Maine. Dick probably knows about it. But kids, you get a book every time you go for a well child checkup, which I think is amazing. And I wish that more places did that. But anyways, keep up the good work and I'll keep listening. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, there's some good beer suggestions because we all know how much Jill likes sours.
I do love sours.
And the idea of a meet in Michigan was appealing.
Yeah, we do go to Michigan every once in a while. And I know that also we're very familiar with the Raising Readers program in Maine.
Yes, it's a wonderful, wonderful program. It provides children books free of charge from birth to age 5.
Yeah, I think every state should have that.
Can't emphasize from a pediatrician's aspect what a valuable program this is.
It is because a lot of homes don't have books. So kids never learn to read, especially now with tablets and everything. So that's great. But what about the case that Sarah suggested? What do we know about that?
Sarah suggested a case on the murder of Lily. This is a girl born Liriana Mears. It occurred on November 3rd, 1989, while she was attending a boy's birthday party at Stockton Beach, New South Wales, on the east coast of Australia. Lily was assaulted by a group of boys after she returned distressed from a sexual encounter on the beach that a reviewing judge later called non-consensual.
So let's just say a rape.
So she was raped.
Yeah.
After being kicked at and spat on by the group, Lee left the party. Then her naked body was found in the sand dunes nearby the next morning with severe genital damage and a crushed skull. So Matthew Grant Webster was an 18-year-old who had acted as a bouncer at the party, and he pleaded guilty to her murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison with a 14-year non-parole period. And he was actually released on parole in June of 2004 after serving 14 and a half years. The other bouncer, Guy Charles Wilson, the only other person over the age 18 at the party, pleaded guilty to assault. The third male, aged 15, pleaded guilty to having sex with a minor. The investigation of Lee's murder proved controversial, however, as several people who admitted to various crimes, including assaulting Lee, were never charged. Webster's confession did not match the forensic evidence either. The murder investigation was reviewed by the New South Wales Crime Commission in 1996 and the Police Integrity Commission in 1998, with the latter recommending the dismissal of the detective in charge of the investigation. Lee's murder received considerable attention in the media, initially focusing on her sexual assault and murder. The attention later concentrated more on her lack of parental supervision and the drugs and alcohol at the party, and on Lee's sexuality. So the coverage of the murder has been cited as an example of blaming the victim.
Sure sounds like
which
it.
seems like a popular thing to do these days.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, Sarah.
Yeah,
there's a lot on that to look at. Okay, and we also have a voicemail from our friend Lisa V from Australia.
Hi, Jill and Dick. It's Lisa from Australia here. Thanks so much for covering a couple of Aussie cases recently. Both the Jill Maher and the Alison Baden Clay cases are important for us all to remember and bring up a lot of issues that need to be addressed in Australia. You covered the cases so completely. It was a great pleasure to listen to your podcasts on these, and I did learn some details that I wasn't aware of, which makes you realise how much the Australian justice system is just inadequate. It's an uphill battle for sure, and the victimisation of women is a huge problem in our country. So glad you have been able to review a couple of the beers from Australia as well. We love your work and look forward to listening in at the quiet end for a long time to come.
So thanks, Lisa. Obviously, Lisa thinks that justice in Australia needs some correction, that it's inadequate.
Yeah, well, I think they're addressing that.
Yeah, I don't know how much.
We'll see.
We'll see, yeah.
Okay, I have one more message from Leah K.
Yeah, we got a voicemail from Leah, and it's very garbled. We really can't even hear it, so I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened, but if you could call again, we'd really like to hear what you had to say. I'm sorry about that. You got an email?
I got emails. This is from Miss Moxie, who is commenting on Gypsy Rose Blanchard.
All right, I'll read it. To those of you blaming and shaming the father or the doctors or anyone who surrounded these people, there are a few things to consider. The father took the mother's word on it that Gypsy was sick. Whenever he questioned it, she would manipulate the situation between having his visitation scaled back, if not made completely impossible. She'd move further and further away, making it harder for him to be part of her life, or have any kind of presence in her life, or have any clue about her doctors or her care. It's also worth noting that although he could have called the hospital and asked for her medical records, Dee Dee changed their last name from Blanchard without an E to Blanchard with an E, and fudged information about Gypsy's date of birth. So no medical professional in their right mind would give sensitive and confidential information to someone claiming to be a father who can't get the spelling of their child's name or birth date right. Dee Dee understood this, so basically Rod Blanchard, the father, had to rely on Dee Dee to keep him informed. So he may have seen this record from that doctor or those discharge papers from that hospital, but he only saw what records Dee Dee wanted to show him. She was a professional con artist. The one doctor who suspected something was up put it in a note that at that point the mother got a copy of, and true to form, the mother didn't bring her back to that hospital for 8 years. There's talk about why the doctors weren't in communication with each other. There's no good way for private practice doctors to do so without violating HIPAA regulations. And yes, that one neurologist who found out she didn't have dystrophy, although the mother reported she did, should have called child services. But it's hard to imagine what would have happened if he had, since these two were darlings of the local community. Nobody would have believed him, and he would have been met with public reprisal. This also begs the question, do charities like Make-A-Wish or Habitat for Humanity question people's claims? Which is a good question, because it seemed awfully easy for them to get that. What about the HIPAA stuff? Do you have anything to say about that, Dick?
Well, the HIPAA stuff, if it's professional to professional, like if I'm talking to another physician, that's okay by HIPAA. I can make a consultation with another doctor. I can discuss the case with another doctor without violating HIPAA.
What about the name change and the date of birth thing? Would that confuse the situation?
It certainly would.
Yeah.
I don't have any good response to that. And Miss Moxie's certainly correct that the father definitely had to rely on what information Dee Dee gave him. So he was probably in the dark for most of the stuff.
Yeah, I don't remember what I said about the father when we did the podcast. It's been a while, but...
He wasn't that aggressive in maintaining a relationship with her.
Right. But I don't know if that makes him a bad person.
Yeah. My former colleague was on the board of Make-A-Wish in Maine, and I know that they looked into claims.
I wonder to what extent, though.
I don't know how deeply they went, but they didn't just take the person's word for it.
Sure.
So they would investigate.
Right, but if all you had to produce was, I would imagine you just need a doctor's note saying that she has a terminal disease, and boom, she'd get it.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's that hard, especially if you're pulling off all this other stuff.
I guess it's not easy to do necessarily, but I guess it could be done.
Well, I'm just saying if you look at all that Dee Dee did, that was the least of the things she'd have to pull off.
Yeah.
I mean, going to these doctors and pulling these things off would be a lot tougher, I would think, than going to the charities. So that's an older case that we did a while ago, but it's one that people just can't stop talking about. It's a remarkable case.
Still keeps people talking.
Yeah.
So thanks, Miss Moxie.
Yeah, thank you.
Now I got a case suggestion from Jill S. This is a case from Durham, North Carolina in 2010. A father was accused of killing his youngest child and of attempting to kill his two older children. The defense presented evidence for automatism, which implies a lack of voluntary action or an unconscious action. So this is the sleepwalking defense.
That is fascinating.
Isn't it? So the trial lasted for a month, and the jurors debated for 4 hours before finding the man not guilty.
Wow.
Which sounds like some big travesty of justice here.
Kind of.
But the members of the jury said that they would have convicted him of the lesser charge of manslaughter, but they were not given that option. Apparently the judge instructed the jury that their options were either murder or acquittal.
So obviously we're not lawyers. We don't know how that works, but I know we have a few listeners that are attorneys, and if anyone can fill us in on why that happens. Why sometimes do you have the option of all these different things, and other times it's either murder or acquittal?
I know. How's that work?
I don't know, but if someone could explain that to us, I'd appreciate it, because when it comes to that, I really have no idea, unfortunately. But thank you, Jill. Good name. Now from Sally W., I have a case suggestion. And she says, "Hi, Jill and Dick. Love your podcast. The conversation and banter between you two are definitely more relaxing than the subject matter you approach. I'd like to suggest a case from here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a state that you seem to have enjoyed recently, and we continue to enjoy."
We do.
So this case is Victoria Martins. Victoria was a 10-year-old girl who was gruesomely murdered on August 24th, 2016. She was dismembered and found by police burning in her mother's bathtub after her mother and her boyfriend alerted neighbors. As the case unfolded, Victoria's mother, Michelle, her boyfriend, Fabian Gonzalez, and Gonzalez's cousin, Jessica Kelly, were arrested for Victoria's murder. In June 2018, Albuquerque's DA announced that Michelle's murder charges had been dropped. She's still on the hook for child abuse and has agreed to a plea deal. Although the case is not finished pending trial in January, Albuquerque's police department has made many blunders in this case. Michelle's initial admission of guilt and the events that transpired the evening her daughter was killed were patently false. APD took her words as gospel and did not investigate the facts and scientific evidence of the case. Although Michelle admitted to witnessing her daughter's murder, evidence uncovered a year after her confession indicates Michelle was not even present at the crime scene at the time her daughter died. And she leaves us some links to educate us on this, which I haven't been able to read through all of them yet. But this is a case with a lot to it, a lot to look at.
Yeah, piques my interest.
Just off the top of my head, not knowing that much about it, I did wonder if there was some kind of false confession involved there. Because why did the mother say she'd witnessed it? Maybe it was something to do with the way that she was interrogated. Maybe she was interrogated without an attorney.
We'd have to look.
Right.
Let's do that.
Okay.
All
so
right.
Thanks, Sally. That's a great suggestion as well. Is that all we have today?
That's it. I
Oh,
think
that's
we
brief.
blabbed long enough.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope we'll get some more voicemails next week.
We love them.
Hopefully from Leah, the one we couldn't hear. I feel really bad about that.
So let's see what we get.
All right. Well, that wraps it up, Dick. Thank you so much. And we'll see everyone at the quiet end next week.
You know where to find us.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Bye.